Well, some ideas I have include finding the strengths of the person with autism. What are they good at? What do they like to do? And it's those strengths that will lead the parent and will lead the teacher to finding areas that child can be successful. So as I was good at taking apart watches and bicycles, this became an area of success for me through college. And helped pay for college. So it's all about finding those interests and then linking them up to job possibilities. Yeah, well, it was a very gradual, slow and gradual process. And I think the most important thing about my parents is they accepted me for who I was, but at the same time recognized there were a lot of challenges in which to overcome by leading and filling an attractive life. I also another hobby of mine is bicycles, so I find that very interesting. I also like to travel, so presenting at these conferences is a very good way to travel. All right, well, for the parents of the forum, I believe the most important thing to keep in mind is that the potential of your child with autism is unlimited, just like everybody else's. All right, and wave just like that. Hi, everybody.
So, looking at the potential of people on the autism spectrum. And that's what we're going to look at for this workshop. And now let's bring up the PowerPoint, and we'll let the fun begin. That's what autism are looking at our strengths for leading a fulfilling and productive life. And when I look at promoting success for people with autism, when I look at determining what those strengths are, the question is how do we find these strengths? And what that requires us to do is to reframe how we look at autism, how we look at the characteristics. And most commonly, when we think about autism, when parents first hear that a child has been diagnosed, the first thing parents hear are all the things that the individual with autism won't be able to do. All the difficulties that they'll have in school, social interaction, and employment, and everywhere else. And what I suggest is we look at these characteristics. Instead of using what I call a deficit model, all the things the person with autism or other disability won't be able to do, let's take a look at what that person can do. Let's ask the question, with the communication, characteristics, and style that person has, with the socialization characteristics that person has, what can they do? And how do we determine what that person likes to do, can do? And what I find is that people tend to do things they like to do, and people tend to not do things that they don't like to do. Things that you're good at, you tend to like to do. So the question I ask is, how does that person with autism spend most of their time? Or would spend most of their time if you let them do it? And if you think about yourself, how do you spend most of your time, or would you spend most of your time if you had the time to do it, if you're not doing what you like to do? And you match that to vocational or avocational possibilities. So we're looking at abilities, we're looking at interests, what kind of mind does the person have, what are those characteristics? The young child with autism who's nonverbal, who likes to do nothing more than build structures using blocks or toy bricks or blinking logs or whatever it might be, is there something that we can do with them? Is there a way that we can mold that interest? And this is the question that we have. So before we get into it, a little bit about me. Things were pretty typical at first. My mother had a 2-hour labor, or 24 hours a day. My wife says I look like an egg. Then at 18 months, like what happens to about half of us, what I call the autism bomb exploded, where I lost functional communication, had meltdown, and was due from the environment. That happens to about half of us. The other half of us on the autism spectrum, something seems to parent the person. But whatever it is, when this bomb goes off, life is never the same. The parents had no idea what to do. There was very little known about autism. The questions at that time: where does autism come from? What do we do about it? On that note, let us all sing to the tune of Where, Oh, Where Has This Little Dog Gone. Ready? Go. Where, oh, where did this autism come from? More from the front. Where, oh, where can it be? More from the baritone. If history's cut off, night contact touch. Oh, where can it be from? Okay, very good. I think with a little more practice on breath control and intonation, we'll be ready for the spring concert. And I bring this up because the questions remain today. We've known about autism for about 60 to 70 years. Autism has been around for a lot longer than that. But that's when we first started talking about it. We considered it as a condition. And we still don't know where it comes from. Best minds of research believe autism starts with a genetic predisposition. And then it gets triggered by something else. And the question is, what is that something else? We have a lot of clues, but we don't have any specifics. We have some people looking at environmental toxins, possibly vaccines, possibly food, possibly other things. And we just don't know. But what we do know is that there seems to be an awful lot more of it. A lot more of it. When I was diagnosed when I was in grade school, the prevalence rate was about 1 in 10,000. Now the prevalence rate is about 1 in 68. That's a lot of autism. And what do? Well, let's take a look. What causes the increase? Is there really more of it? Or are we better at recognizing it? It seems like autism is being delivered via Federal Express by the trucker. Well, if we look at the numbers, as we look at the data, we see that over the last generation there's been a sharp increase in the number of Federal Express packages being delivered. We also see a sharp increase in the rate of autism. So it must be that Federal Express is causing autism. There's a very good correlation between the rise in Federal Express packages and the rise in autism. So a lot of you get going because you know how ridiculous it is. And what I did is I'm just playing around with statistics. And there is a very good correlation between the rise in Federal Express packages being delivered and the rise in autism. But what is the missing word? And that's causation. We don't know what the cause is. There's a good correlation where the number of things with the rise of autism, including the number of hours children spend watching TV or various computer screens. And there are people who are trying to pin autism on that. So again, it's a really good correlation, and it may be causing problems, certain other problems, spending so much time watching video screens. But we really can't say what it's causing autism or triggering autism. So these are some of the questions that we need to address. Some of the things we need to continue looking for. So another reason that I bring up Federal Express has to do with the logo. How many of you have noticed the arrow between the E and the X before? That arrow. Well, now you have. You all can see it. Before, you may not have noticed it. Now you've noticed it. And just like I've increased your ability to diagnose white space arrows and FedEx logos, maybe society is better able to recognize autism when it sees it. So maybe that's playing a large role in the increase. So whatever it is, it's certainly more aware of it. Seems to be a lot of it around. all from grade school. I was the only child I knew with autism. And even if I think of some of my classmates who should have been diagnosed but they weren't, it doesn't account for the fact that we now have entire schools dedicated to children with autism. There's entire classrooms in schools dedicated to children with autism. So getting back to my situation, took my parents a full year to find a place for diagnosis. Fortunately, my parents refuted the professional's recommendation for institutionalization, which was very much like a rollover was, and they convinced the school to take me in about a year. So they advocated on my behalf, just like so many parents here advocate for their children. How many parents of children with autism do we have here? All right, good number. That's where it all starts, with the parents. How many educators do we have? Oh, I know. Good. We need you. Because you're with our kids on the autism spectrum for several hours every day. And it's a challenge to teach all of your students, teach students with autism. How many school administrators do you have? Okay, good. Good. We need school administrators to understand what those challenges are and to provide support in terms of resources so that teachers can effectively teach students, individuals on the autism spectrum. How many therapists do we have? Oh, we have a goodly number. What kind of therapist are you? Yeah, you.
Undergrad school training to be a school psychologist. Right now I intern at a District 75 school with autism.
All right, so school psychology. And we need more psychologists to understand autism. We're getting away from the idea that autism is a psychiatric condition caused by poor parenting and moving onward to how can we help children on the autism spectrum better understand their environment and to address the challenges psychologically that come with being on the autism spectrum, as opposed to trying to counsel people out of being, out of having autism through psychology. So that's good as well. How many people here do we have with autism? All right, good. Well, there'll be more of you by the time I'm done. So getting back to my parents' situation, what did they do? They convinced the school to take me in about a year, and it was during that year that my parents implemented what we would today refer to as an intensive home-based early intervention program, emphasizing music, movement, sensory integration, narration, and imitation. So in today's terminology, probably look more like one of the developmental approaches that we have today, such as floor time, RDI, millimeter. That's just today's terminology. In those days, the concept of early intervention just didn't exist. Didn't even exist. So really it was just parents doing what parents felt they needed to do to connect with their child. So what did they do? Well, first they tried to get me to imitate them, and that didn't work. So then they flipped it around, and they imitated me. And once they did that, I became aware of it in my environment. And I believe the key educational implication is that before you do any good education of somebody with autism, then you have to develop a trusting relationship. Then you can move on. Then you can move on. And I think that holds true with any student, whether they have autism or not. And a lot of the things that we look at, whether it's looking for strengths and abilities, isn't that something you would do with anybody, whether they have autism or not anyway? The same stuff. So why are we talking about it in terms of autism? Because the difference is the efforts we're going to put forth may be more focused and may be more intense in particular areas. That is where the difference is. But the concepts are the same. So by the time age 4 rolled around, my parents, when words of my parents did, speech had begun to return. Speech had begun to return, and I got admitted to that school that initially rejected me. I feel that we have the technology, we have the ability, we have the know-how, so that people on the autism spectrum leading fulfilling and productive lives can become the rule rather than the exception. So rather than autism being a bomb, instead of looking at the closed door of disability and deficit and disorder, let's take a look at the abilities. What can a person with autism do? And by doing that, rather than autism being a bomb, autism can become a bomb. So how does autism become a bomb? Well, let's take a look at a hypothetical case, someone such as Robert, who works in Penn Station providing transportation system information to Las Vegas. He's highly verbal. He's on the autism spectrum. Let's take a look at the characteristics as they apply to employment. The communication characteristics, for those of us who are verbal, how many of you would agree that they tend to be detailed, factual, truthful, sometimes too truthful, data-driven, repetitive, edited? How many times have you asked someone to repeat directions when you're lost? So I guess it works. What about the social interaction? Typical social interaction, to be specific. But often when I see people on the autism spectrum together, they seem to interact reasonably well. Most of the world, at least at this point, doesn't have autism. So we have to take a look at typical social interaction. And if we think about the social interaction for a job like this, it's pretty limited and predictable. Brief greeting, a request for directions, and then a goodbye. And he's happy to provide those directions. If we think about where he gets this information, his coworkers have to look it up in a reference of some sort. Take the question, they look it up, probably in a computer, then they provide the answer. With the person on the autism spectrum, we're looking at one of the most common special interests. Trains, transportation system, information. He's got this stuff all memorized. So as a result, he can access this information faster than everybody else. So what we're looking at is the situation of somebody who is on the autism spectrum, and because they have these characteristics, they outperform their coworkers who don't have autism. And this is how we need to take a look at the abilities of people on the autism spectrum. What are the strengths? What can they do? So, two things. One is, take all of the pictures you want. See someone taking pictures, or maybe even videoing. Go ahead, do it. Yeah, go ahead. Take all the pictures you want, and if you want a copy of the stuff in living PDF color, email me afterwards, and I'll send you a living color copy. And you had a question over here. So go ahead.
Mentioning that I got my diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome at the age of 56. For some reason, I remember from childhood on, I used to run away from my house, explore the neighborhood, and fortunately or unfortunately, the only jobs I basically do well out of being a footmaster.
Okay.
I'm honest.
Yeah, well, gotta be honest.
I don't understand why I worked for various rescue companies still from 1984 to 94. I'd come in to pick up a little package, and people would say, "We're here so fast, we usually wait a long time."
All right.
I'm wondering if there is a connection between their transportation and why you invest in that.
There may be.
I'm thinking of that. I don't know. I guess
Right. But whatever it is, whatever is the reason behind the strength and that ability, you just use it. And that's what you're doing. And that's how we promote success. We promote success by looking at the abilities. When I talk about the abilities of people on the autism spectrum, we do have to consider those challenges. How many of you would agree that having autism presents significant challenges? Yeah, I would too. Because if they didn't exist, we wouldn't be here trying to figure it out. So we do have to remediate those challenges. We do have to accommodate for them. But at the same time, we also have to consider the strengths of people on the autism spectrum. So as we do that, as we set the stage for lifelong success, these are some of the areas that I think are important to consider, that I think about when promoting success for people on the autism spectrum, We'll look at some of them today, and for the ones we don't get to, come back on January 22nd, and on the other dates that I'll be here talking about autism, we'll eventually get through all of them. So what are some of the most important ones? I think it starts with the concept of interdependence. We often hear about the word independence. How independent is that person going to be? And I think that's the wrong word, because someone who's independent doesn't need to talk to other people, doesn't need to ask for help, doesn't need to advocate for themselves. They just kind of do it all themselves. And the last time I checked, only hermits live independently. Everybody else appropriately depends on other people to do what they need to get done. So one example is, consider the chairs you're sitting on. It's probably a pretty safe bet to assume that none of you built the chair that you're sitting on. Nobody gets down on you saying that you need to improve your skills in independent living because you didn't build your own chair. You appropriately depend on somebody else to build the chair. You appropriately depend on other people to do other things either you're not good at, or you just aren't able to do, or even just don't want to do. You ask for assistance from other people. And that's an appropriate thing to do. So we need to consider the concept of interdependence, leading an appropriately interdependent life. So getting back to my situation, at age 4, the speech beginning to come back, I entered a school that initially rejected me. I got reevaluated. Instead of being considered a psychotic and ready for an institution, I got upgraded to neurotic. Things were looking up. I discovered the wonderful world of watch motors. What I would do is, I was found at age 4 in the kitchen taking apart a watch very much like this. I took out the hands, the gears, everything. Had a little fun with them, and then I put it all back together again. The watch still worked, and there weren't any pieces left over. So incredible fine motor control to take apart the watch. And it's always curious to me as to where that fine motor control went when it came to penmanship. How many of you know people with autism who are penmanship disaster areas? Yeah, me too. One of the worst experiences I could have in grade school would be to walk into a room with a paragraph on the board. So that we were going to have to copy it down. And it would take me all class period to get through a few words, and everybody else had gone to recess. And you had your hand up.
Yes, I was actually in this class with one of those connected to the and one of the office. And we have also translated them. So, why would you write? Now, in everyone, you know which one does. But in the other hand, check deals with it, with autism, meaning lack of social appreciation.
That's right. There is that lack of socialization, or lack of typical socialization.
In a second, we are defending people. Why do you defend and give up own appreciation and to get out of it?
Yes. It's a balancing act. It's a balancing act. And everybody has a different level of independence and dependence on others. And what we need to do is we need to recognize where is that sweet spot, you might say? Where is that point? And for every one of you, it's going to be in a different place regarding different things. Some of you may be good at fixing your own cars, and that's what you do because you like to do it, and you're good at it. Others of you may just go to the gas station and have them check the oil and change the oil and do all the things in your car. Some of you may be really good at cleaning your own homes, and you do that. Some of you may decide you don't want to do that, and you hire somebody else to clean your home. Even if you're able to do it, because this society don't like to do it, you've got to do something else. So there's all levels of dependence and independence. And interdependence is the idea is that we know how to appropriately ask for help, ask for others, engage in others, to help us with things that either we can't do, things we're not that good at, and in some cases it's just things we don't want to do at all. And we get somebody else to do that. So getting back to the watches, the Parents noticed this ability to take apart watches. Instead of looking at the closed door of disability, of deficit, things that I wasn't able to do, soon they provided all kinds of devices to take apart. So clocks, other watches, radios, whatever they might be. And they'd sit with me to make sure that I got them back together again. They made a big deal about this. They were building a sense of self-awareness. Often, I see people on the autism spectrum not quite understanding where their skills are and where their challenges are. And just like everybody else, it's important to know where your skills are and where are your challenges. For people on the autism spectrum, you may have to take an extra effort to make sure that there's a good understanding of that. And what this does is it sets the stage for self-determination. Be able to make good adult decisions. And again, it's getting back to the idea of knowing your strengths and knowing your challenges. So as my parents did that, I became aware that I had skills in this area. I had an ability to take things apart and put them together. And what that does is set the stage for disclosure. And I see a question that's popping up over here with Carl.
Actually, I wanted to make a comment because, like yourself, as a kid, I had a very intense interest in taking things apart and putting things together and all that, except I stayed with it my whole life, and to a large extent responsible for the fact that I was, even though for most of my life I didn't know that I was on the autism spectrum, but I was nevertheless able to have a career as an engineer for over 28 years.
Right. And that's because Carl found his strength. And even though he didn't know he had autism, he just knew. Somehow you knew this was an area of strength. You probably had a sense of what areas were challenging for you. And just like everybody else, we stay in our areas of strength. And we try to navigate around the areas that we're not so good at. And if we're able to do that, that promotes fulfillment, productivity, and success. So here I am in kindergarten, and we'll get to you right after I talk a little bit about kindergarten and the grade school kindergarten, regular school kindergarten, of social and academic catastrophe. You know what happens to people who are different in grade school. Fortunately, school systems are beginning to realize that bullying is not a developmental phase that people need to go through. More and more states, now I think most states require all school systems to submit an anti-bullying program. So we're getting there. There's still more work to go. I guess walking around the classroom saying the letter B over and over didn't endear me to my classmates. I didn't know how to interact in a way that my classmates understood or expected. Perhaps in those days, and again, the tools that we have today didn't exist. But had there been the concept of maybe having a paraprofessional, had there been the concept of social stories, power cards, and other social narratives to provide instruction in a way that I can understand, this is how you interact with your classmates, maybe that would have been helpful. And flipping it around, had there been an awareness of developing a sensitivity towards others who have differences in grade school, that also would have helped. So it goes both ways. So often we talk about people on the autism spectrum needing to make changes, modifications, and adaptations in order to interact in a typical environment. But also we need to go in the other direction, helping people, whether it's in the workforce, whether it's in education, whether it's in the community, understand those with autism. So by the two sides coming together, we can promote greater success. Academically, I was also a catastrophe. I was usually about a grade behind in most of my subjects. Teachers didn't know how to reach me, although I had my special interest, beginning with the watches. However, I had others as well. But one of the reasons that I kept going to school is because that's where information and knowledge lives, particularly in the library. So I go into the library, get books on my favorite subjects, whatever it might be. It could be astronomy, it could be electronics, it could be earth sciences, whatever it might be. And I just read them, all of them. Big stack on my desk. And then I was done reading the stack, just turn them over and read them again. Because now they were getting familiar. I take notes, hockey diagram, and maybe that's where I got most of my education. So preparing for success also means understanding, having self-awareness. What does it mean to have a difference? What does it mean to have autism? And there are a couple of questions that are popping up over here. So
I just wanted you to repeat what you said about learning to read.
say that again.
That was
Learn-
before.
learning?
Did you say something about learning to read? in the
No,
beginning?
I think I said learning for me.
Oh, okay.
By the time it gets through all of this amplification, who knows what comes out the other end. So,
You didn't say anything about reading?
well, I think I said I read the books.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that was the word. Yeah, but I didn't talk about reading strategies or anything like that, which is also important. I mean, there are reading strategies that we can implement to educate students on the autism spectrum. But what so often we find is that most of us with autism can be really good at reading, or decoding, decoding. So think about the 2-year-old sitting on the kitchen floor reading a cookbook for his mother. Doesn't understand what he's reading, but he's reading it perfectly. So that's known as hyperlexia. Over-involvement in the symbols, in this case, the alphabet, and being able to decode them really well. Then the question is, how do we promote comprehension? And that's where the challenge is. And there's a number of visual strategies that we can use to help promote comprehension, such as visual line maps. And so, had they have those, that might have been helpful too, in those days. So getting back to disclosure. What do you do with a child at age 6 who's asking about their differences? Why is it so hard for them to make friends? Why is gym so difficult? How do you tell somebody with autism that they have autism? Well, I was lucky in this regard because my parents used the word autism in the house for as long as I can remember. So since about age 5 and a half, when my speech had pretty much normalized, when I had enough cognition to be aware of such things, I just knew my parents talked about the word, used the word autism in the house just like any other word. So we talk about autism just like you might say somebody has blonde hair, or black hair, or blue eyes, or green eyes, or whatever it might be. It was just something that was there. And it was something that we could work with. We didn't know much about it, but it certainly helped explain an awful lot of differences. However, I find a lot of people only find out about autism much later in life. And the question is, how do you tell somebody with autism that they have autism? How do you do it in such a way so that we consider the person's strengths, but also remain realistic about the challenges that exist? Because if the challenges weren't there, we wouldn't be here trying to figure it out.
I'm going to be honest, it's a challenge. Do you want me to announce my name or not?
Sure, you want to know.
I wasn't interrupted. My name is Louise Cabardo. I'm 68 years old, and all my life, from the time I was little, I had a desperate passion to work with infants. At the age of 50, I got my life's dream, which lasted for 10 years. Now I'm 68, I'm in a situation where I want to go to school to be an ultrasound technician, and everybody in Fountain House where I normally go said no, Louise. And I'm finding out myself, the more I'm trying to study on the internet, the more I see it's unrealistic because of my age. I developed a passion late in life after my niece and babies were satisfied. I might have developed it to an Asperger's syndrome support group when I heard another person's story. I might have gotten it that, but how I got the passion, I think someone who missed me. But I know one thing that's evil. No
talking about learning styles, and that's an area that we're going to address in a future workshop. How do we address the learning styles of people with autism? And if we consider learning styles, what we do know is that those learning styles are the same as everybody else. You look at everybody here. Some of you are visual, some of you are tactile, some of you are auditory, some of you are musical, whatever it might be. However, the difference between those of us with autism and those who don't have autism is that most of you, whatever your other styles, so you might be a visual person, your auditory receptors, your auditory abilities are good enough to get through school, to get through work, to get through life. So with most people, say you're a visual person and the teacher or the professor is delivering information auditorily and just talking and perhaps doesn't have a PowerPoint for the visual, you can still get enough information to get by. But for those of us on the autism spectrum, we tend to be a study of extremes. So the things we're good at, we're incredibly good at. Things we're bad at, we're horribly bad at. There's often no middle. And with learning styles, what that means is that we may be amazing in the areas of our strength, such as visual, such as tactile. But the others are just kind of trash. They just don't work. So we've got our learning styles just like everybody else. We may be so far into that learning style that it's to the exclusion of others. And that's just something we need to be aware of. Go ahead.
I must say there was something monopolizing. I was in a nursing program in the 1960s. I failed statistics. I got beaten in the second time, but I had a different teacher who scored it differently. And he said, and he gave consideration to the fact that 50% of the students in this class were taking it for the first time. 50% of the students were genius. He was determined to make sure that nobody in his class would have to repeat it. So it turns out that when I had it before the age of computers and calculators, he purposely did not give any kind of math exams in the class going into he made sure all of our exams were take home so that everybody would pass. But I discovered something. I basically learned algebra maybe through my traveling, going along 96 feet east, 96 feet west, knowing that the right is positive, the left is negative, the north is positive, south is negative now.
All right.
He is the messenger. Years to messenger, and I tell you algebra, I'm telling you.
Yeah, that's the kinesthetic stuff, so we're not. And that's how it is for many of us on the autism spectrum. I wish you had been in my statistics class because I had a similar situation with statistics. I remember having to take statistics in college. And we'll get to in a moment. I had to take statistics in college. And there were terrible rumors around the class. I had a terrible reputation. We wanted to get a D or an F in statistics. So I started the class in the semester, and I knew I would get a D or an F, so I dropped it. Then I took it in the summer, and just like you, had a different teacher who taught me a different way, and I ended up getting an A. So for a number of years, I made it sort of a personal mission to teach statistics properly in a way people could understand. And we have a lot of fun in my statistics class. The title of the book was Statistics for People Who Think They Hate Statistics. So that gives you an idea of how the class goes. Yes?
Can you explain again the connection between the autism that is excellent in what good at however what they're good at the learning style? I think so much explanation.
All right, so what I was talking about is the things we're good at, we're incredibly good at. So it could be a learning style, it could be a particular ability, it could be perhaps artistic ability, playing music. And what that also means is the stuff we're bad at, we're really bad at. So what that means is that, for example, those of us who are visual may not be able to take information in auditory or kinesthetic. So that's what that means. That's what I'm explaining. So getting back to these quotes, how do you tell someone who has autism they have autism? Let's take an example. I was working with a child since about age 5.5, giving him music lessons. He had Asperger's syndrome. The parents refused to use the word autism in the house because they just knew with enough intensive activity, we really interventionize the Asperger's syndrome right out of him. Well, then we get to his teenage years, and he still has Asperger's syndrome. And not only that, it's more apparent now than he was when he was a young child, because life gets more complex, and they see the ability to cope. If we go back to the diagnostic criteria, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, Mental Disorders, the 5th edition, the latest edition, there's a number of problems with that edition, but there's also a number of good things that they included. One was the sensory issues. That was the first time we used sensory issues as a characteristic of autism. And the second thing is that there's a sentence indicating that autism may be diagnosed later in life when complexity of life overwhelms the ability to cope. So anyway, that's what happened with this child. His parents realized the autism is here to stay. They asked me to do the deed. And I told them, well, it's a dirty job, and Bruce Wayne available to point back. And I said, okay, I guess I'll do it. So we started the next lesson in the first step of the 4-stage process that I use to tell people that they have autism. First one, awareness of strengths and challenges. Talked about his strengths in music, graphic design, and computers. Talked about his challenges in making friends, physical education, and penmanship. And he got that pretty quickly. So once we got to that, and this is something you can start pretty early. The parents were doing it even though they weren't aware that that's what they were doing at age 4 when they found me taking the pop watches and making a big deal about it. And then there was step 2. And I call that racking up strengths and challenges. Take the strengths on one side, a piece of paper, you have the challenges on the other. And we decided that since he was so good at his computer, just use your computer to write the paper. Write the papers. You don't need to write stuff. They thought that was a good idea. So in this stage, number 1, you find the strengths that accompany the challenge. Then number 2, there's a word that I haven't used yet. I haven't used it yet today. That is, when we're talking about strengths, what do we often talk about? Right, weakness. So I've been using the word challenge. The challenge suggests that you can work around, through, over, make adaptations or accommodations for it. Whereas weakness is a static word. And it hasn't got any negative connotations as well. And I think about all of the IEPs. A lot of you are educators. Think about all those IEPs with the strength section and the weaknesses section. And what if we crossed out the word weakness and put in the word challenge? It would suggest to us, all right, let's find a way to work around, accommodate for, or adapt to these challenges. Then comes non-judgmental comparison. Look at other people he knows, family members, friends. The idea that different people have different strengths, different challenges, no one's better than anybody else. And we use our strengths to lead fulfilling and productive lives. Sometimes this is a good time to bring in the concept. They bring in some potential superstar role models, not too many, don't overdo it. We do know that many people think Bill Gates has autism. He seems to do okay with his computer business. We also know that there are various actors and movie producers. Steven Spielberg, for example, who has disclosed on his website that he has Asperger's syndrome. So we can take a look at a few of them. Then, before presenting the label, I talk about scientists and doctors who study people's characteristics. And it just so happens to be that your set of characteristics line up with what is known as Asperger's syndrome. So with this child, it took about 15 minutes to get here. He said, okay, enough of this, let's get back to the lesson. And I didn't know if he got it, because we went through very quickly. A few weeks later, I asked his father, how did your son do with the disclosure? And Dad said, my son, he lost having Asperger's syndrome. And now he knew why he was the way he was. And this is important to do, because otherwise the world is just a a massive confusion of accommodations, difficulties, and unexplained strengths. And what this does is build a framework of understanding and uses the label as a sort of convenient container, carrying case for describing a situation. And what so often happens is that I find that disclosure occurs exactly backwards. And the backwards type of disclosure might be something like, Carl, we've done our assessments, and our assessment suggests that you have Asperger's syndrome. And then what's going to go on with Carl's mind? Well, Asperger's syndrome sounds a little dangerous. Am I going to die from that? Should I get it from my brother? Is it contagious? And spend the rest of the time eliminating worry, fear, anxiety, tension. And whereas the other way, we're talking about the characteristics, then by the time we get to the label, that's the final piece of the puzzle. Oh, so that's what it's called. That's why things are the way they are. You had to hear that.
How does the removal of the Asperger's syndrome from the DSM is affecting, the current diagnosis?
Well, that's causing a lot of challenges. Because number one, we have a population of people who had built an identity around Asperger's syndrome. And when the news first came out that they were going to replace Asperger's syndrome, and they were going to put everybody with Asperger's syndrome into the autism spectrum, I wasn't thrilled about the idea, but okay, I can live with it. Maybe they've got some ideas as to why it's better. And one reason why it might be better is to avoid parsing of the categories, which means sometimes people hear of a diagnosis and they say, all right, based on that diagnosis, this person won't be able to do these things. That's what I mean by parsing of the categories. And we see that, for example, with the term low functioning and high functioning. And what does that mean? And I can think of people who are at either end, and we might consider as high or low, but having abilities or challenges that can't be explained. For example, the person I know who might be considered high functioning, the verbal IQ of over 200. Those of you familiar with IQ tests really don't go that high, so it's just yes. But at the same time, she has such challenges in social interaction, she'll never find employment the way we think about finding and keeping a job. So is she high or low functioning? Then another friend of mine who looks, for lack of better terminology, low functioning. And if she came into this room, you'd see someone who looks like they probably have pretty significant mental retardation or a cognitive or intellectual disability, as we call it today. But she would be able to make up to the front of the room here. So she has autism plus a couple of several palsy. So you can imagine how she might move. But she'd be able to interact and communicate with you just as well as I can, but she'd be typing into the computer. She's not verbal. She makes a lot of noise, but we have to figure out what those noises mean. But she's just as intelligent as the rest of us. She just communicates differently. So is she high functioning? Is she low functioning? Or are we low functioning and figuring out how to talk about autism? And I think that's what it is. We don't have good terminology for autism. So what the DSM-5 people did is they just threw out all the subcategories. And the idea was, let's just call it autism spectrum, and that's going to force educators, clinicians, and others to really look at the individual and see what needs they have and what needs to be supported. But at the other end, what we finally found out that happened is that a lot of the people with Asperger's syndrome ended up getting dumped into another category called social communication disorder, which is no longer considered as part of the autism spectrum. So, yeah, I know that. Did that get? Well, that's the question. How will they get services? Well, all of you educators have it easy, because you know all of those students. That's what has happened now is that the autism diagnosis is becoming even less useful than it used to be, because it's such a ridiculously wide spectrum, and now there's no subtypes that help us differentiate.
But look at the case of the positive
typically looking at people with autism versus, looking for the low functioning, then it makes it more acceptable.
Yeah. So in that way it's good. And I think it's good to broaden and be more aware of the extremes of the spectrum. Perhaps it would have been helpful to find a way to create reasonable subtypes. As we know that they exist anyways. We know that there is this Asperger type subtype, but we don't use that word anymore. We know that there's a whole subtype that has to do with digestive issues. Some people have them, but some people don't. Tom?
Yes, I have a couple of comments on what we were just talking about a moment ago. First of all, in regard to the issue of how you tell somebody that they have autism, in the case of an adult where simply suspect, which is a rather tricky thing, but I have a method that I've used a handful of times. I simply disclose to them, and in the course of that, I give them a brochure with a list of typical traits and see how they respond to it. So, one way would be to, if you suspect an adult may be on the spectrum, to get somebody that they know who is on the spectrum to disclose to them and tell them about their condition and see what happens.
Right.
I just think that may be an effective strategy in many cases. And my other comment is in regard to famous people suspected on the spectrum. You have to be very careful because a lot of those are dubious or wishful thinking, and particularly in the case of people in entertainment. Everything that they say is whatever their publicists tell them that they should say, regardless of whether or not it's true. We most recently saw this in the case of Jerry Seinfeld.
Yeah, absolutely, right.
So
Yeah,
you really have to be careful about it.
Right. And a lot of people kind of have autism or Asperger syndrome. Some of them have been dead for hundreds or thousands of years. We can't go back. But it's interesting to consider the characteristics.
And I just wanted to say in addition to that, I've heard a lot of talk about Steve Jobs having been on the spectrum and insinuate that, and I am quite positive that is definitely not true. So as I said, you just have to be very careful what exactly is used.
Yeah, that's correct. Yes. That won't get you about you and that person behind you. Yeah, go ahead.
My daughter, who's 23, was just recently diagnosed with autism. This is on top of all the other things she's had until now. And what was assigned to her was a number on the spectrum. And when I asked, what does this mean? It's just a number that's assigned and it's considered to be mild autism. So it's kind of like, what are the numbers and what does that mean?
Yeah, I don't know if you can reduce autism to a number. Yeah, I mean, you might be able to reduce a particular characteristic to a number, but not the whole spectrum. And it's too diverse for that. Yes.
In my case, the system gave me very limited social skills training, and I had to do the rest. I had to teach myself not to talk on one subject, a variety of subjects. I had to teach myself to deal with different groups. I'm in the First Barnegat Folk Club, going to the Paris, go to synagogue, made friends with a company that served in Iraq, Trolley Company, separate platoon. Charlie Clay wrote a book called Redeployment about his experience. Met all those people. I befriended. I had to learn how to deal with a whole bunch of American Indians, several people were Cherokee, several people were Mohawk. I had to teach myself a lot of these social skills. I'm seeing a dating coach right now. This is very limited on how much socialization training is going to get me, and I got to do the rest.
Yeah, that's right. It requires a lot of hard work from those of us on the spectrum, and a lot of the research has to be done on our own. And I've done plenty of research on social interaction on my own, just because basically we know where our needs are. We know what best fits, what needs to be addressed. And you have a comment?
Yes. I was curious to ask this question. How much has the
personalities. I mean, because if somebody is blonde, black hair, special characteristics came from the parents, right? So I was wondering, because in Christians, they go through certain marriages. And they have huge research work in America, and they did a lot of work in the area of autism. So how many chances came because we get characteristics from the parents. So how much chances is cousin marriages, cause of torture? Or if there's another chance of, antibiotic medicines or these things are how much?
Well, there's so little known that we can't even put percentages on. The reason why I talk about genetics, even though with genetics, the best that we've done, the best that we have is that we know that the genetics of autism is scattered over 160 genes. Little pieces are all over the place. So that doesn't help us very much. But what I do see is that if a child has autism, there will probably be characteristics of autism in their parents and other family members. I remember meeting the dad of the first child I worked with. And they said, "Hey Dad, I think you're autistic." He didn't like it. Well, then I found out the idea didn't eat solid foods until he was 9.5. He also has what I call a negative autism diagnosis at the Children's Hospital in Boston. And what I mean by that is that after spending months with a doctor, the result was a letter: "Dear Mom and Dad, your child cannot be autistic because he's talking." Well, now we know what that's called, although the DSM won't let us use that word. And now Dad realizes that he's either on the spectrum or he's pretty close to it. And here's what my friend Jerry Newport has classified as being a recovered AFib. What does AFib stand for? Autistic Parent Heavily in Denial. So you may know something, especially educators who you get to these parent-teacher conferences, and then suddenly you say, "Oh, I think I know where Jose's ADHD comes from, or his dyslexia, or whatever it might be." And you see those characteristics. So what this disclosure does, only when you know where your challenges are and where your strengths are, then are you ready to advocate for yourself in a way that other people can understand and provide support. So there's more of that in here. I guess what the best thing to say is that I'm the dummy who wrote this book. This can also be a helpful diagram to use when I'm either talking with individuals or I'm talking with entire classrooms about disability, about differences. And the idea that people are going to have strengths in certain areas and in certain classes. And what I might do is pull the class and say, everyone who's good at math, raise your hand. Everyone who feels they could be better at math, raise your hand. And now we start talking about differences. And we can do that in the areas of sensory preferences. Some people like certain sensory input, certain sounds, certain textures, certain tastes. Other people don't like them. You can't say someone's better than anybody else because they like chocolate or they like vanilla, because it's just different. And that's what we begin to explore in classrooms or individuals. And then the only difference between them and people who have disabilities is that the strengths go that way and the challenges go that way. So they're much wider. And often when I do this, I get interesting disclosures from children in the classroom. I had one child who disclosed, this was out in the Bronx. He said that he had a strain of autism. That's what he called it, a strain of autism. And he looked pretty Aspergerish to me. And that's how he understood being on the autistic spectrum. So here I am at age 8. about third grade. I spent hours cracking open small rocks with a big rock. I was fascinated by the shiny specks inside. That eventually grew to a special interest in geography, geology, many others, as I mentioned before. I remember in third grade I had a stack of books on my desk, and she told me that I'd never learned how to do that. But somehow I learned enough math, as I described before, to teach statistics at the university level. Now the good news is that I see a lot of educators noticing this as a special interest and find a way to work it into the curriculum and make the curriculum intrinsically rewarding. Everybody learns better about what they're interested in. If you're interested in something, you're probably good at it too. For those of us on the autism spectrum, probably just to a greater extent. I became fascinated with bicycles. Okay, say that again?
Well, the bicycles on top of the words and I can't see the words.
Oh yeah, you can kind of cover it up. Yeah, that does happen. But anyways, that bicycle rode in and rode out. Actually, was riding. I was actually riding a bicycle yesterday. I got with a friend on the Upper East Side to dinner, and it was just much faster to get places on one of those city bikes than to take a cab or take the subway. So all I have to ask is that try to be quiet. I know you're talking about stuff here, but it's just one of those sensory things. If I hear extraneous sound, I get all distracted. Maybe an autistic thing. But anyways, it was much faster riding a city bike than it was to attempt to get around any other way. So I became fascinated with bicycles. I was very fascinated by the spinning cars. I got to such a point where I could take a bicycle down, park down the ball bearing, and spokes, and then put it all back together again, and the bike still worked. And there weren't any pieces left over. Special interests. We so often hear about special interests in people with autism. Here's a definition that Tony Adams used to use. Interest of such great intensity that it interferes with daily functions. Now, if we consider that definition, that's using a deficit model. This is something that gets in the way, something that you have to get rid of or push aside before you can get any work done. Or, might there be a way to use an abilities-based model and look at it as a positive? And one way to do that might be to think of it as an interest of such great intensity that it provides powerful motivation for learning curriculum, exploring career options, or just doing whatever needs to be done. So that would be the difference, for example, between taking a kid who's fascinated with airplanes and saying, okay, you're good in math for the first 20 minutes and you get all your work done, then you can go on a computer and use a flight simulator for the last 10 minutes of class. Or you could say, gee, you're really fascinated with airplanes, let's develop some math problems related to airplanes. So that's the difference between making an interest or something extrinsically rewarding and intrinsically rewarding. And the more we can go with the intrinsic rewards or reinforcements, if you want to talk behaviorally, then the better it will be. So these are some of my special interests. They come and they go. Sometimes it's more than one of them at a time. And you need to make sure you get them all, because there'll be a quiz at the end. Now we talk about success. This is an important area as well. Employment. We all have to work for a living, and that includes those of us on the autism spectrum. And preparing for employment, we start with jobs around the house. Sometimes they're referred to as chores. The commonality that chores have with employment is you have to do them on a regular basis, whether you like it or not. and you have to perform to a certain efficiency. Just like with employment. And those on the spectrum who are more significantly affected, if they can't do the whole job of feeding the cat or making the bed or taking out the trash, can we break it down into little pieces so that they do part of the job? And then teach those individual parts and eventually glue them together so that we have the entire task complete. That can transition onward to teenager-sized jobs. Jobs that need to be done around the neighborhood, around the house, or perhaps even accesses a special interest. So, for example, you have a computer geek, maybe some local businesses, a houses of worship, who could use help in the computer aspect of things. So, starting with that sets the stage for developing a good work later on. At age 10, I was awfully concerned about the letter E, because I heard you have to drop E before adding ing. What if that E going to get hurt when it fell to the ground? Isn't it poor social skills to push letters around? I had a friend who said he felt like a pizza. He didn't look like one, he didn't smell like one, so there was some other problems. I remember sitting in a restaurant one time, and my mother was suddenly pointing, oh, look at that girl over there, she's giving you the eye. I thought it was pretty disgusting. We tend to take things literally, literal fun. I remember in high school, our homeroom session being interrupted by someone announcing that the principal had lost his mother. Well, I used to lose things too. And I asked my parents where they were. And they always gave me a really ridiculous answer. It's in the last place he left it. If I knew that, I wouldn't ask them. But if I thought that was good enough for my parents to say to me probably thousands of times, maybe I could be helpful to the principal. And if he thought real hard as to where he last saw his mother, yeah, it wasn't good at all. So if it seems like one of us is being rude or fresh or talking back, it's possible that we might be taking things literally. Tell the person with Asperger's syndrome, I'll be with you in a minute. And then how do you feel if that student is looking at you going 59, 58? That's pretty obnoxious, isn't it? But we might do something like that. Tell a person with Asperger's syndrome to hold the door. And that's right, interpretation of language. Now we're getting into the area of what is known as hidden curriculum. Hidden curriculum are the rules that everybody knows, nobody talks about. If you don't get these rules, you become a social outcast pretty quickly. Sometimes you can get into trouble. Where do we find hidden curriculum? Where do we not find hidden curriculum? Yeah. Whenever you're by yourself, that's when you don't find hidden curriculum. So here's a nice example of hidden curriculum. We're in the men's room. Sam came in second. He's making two mistakes. What two mistakes is Sam making? Looking and...
Go the one on the far right.
All right, he's too close.
Yeah.
So he's looking and he's too close. And what I always find interesting is that the ladies often answer this faster than the guys. We've got kind of a split deal here. The answer from a lady and the answer from a guy. So you guys in the audience, there's a number of you here, which is good because we need more guys involved in this business. And us guys, I think you agree with me, going to the bathroom is a pretty solitary experience. You go in, you do your business, and you get out. You don't work on good social interaction skills. You don't focus on eye contact. Now what about the ladies' room? Sometimes I see a whole room of ladies. There's 5 of you. And they all take their bags and you're gone. Sometimes I hear a lot of noise coming out of these rooms. There must be social interaction. I've even heard some of these rooms have a couch so you can get comfortable. So very different rules between genders. Nobody talks about these rules, but somehow most people figure it out. The people on the autism spectrum might require direct instruction. And the good news is that we have all the tools to do that, whether it's a visual schedule, power card, social story, video modeling, role play, a number of ways to do it. So here's an example of video modeling. And this will be for the person who's on the autism spectrum, who's traveling just like everybody else, but maybe missing some rules on hidden curriculum, in particular using the metaphor. So if we look at this situation, the idea is that whenever you travel, wherever you might be, sometimes there's just a need to go to the bathroom. So first, you've got to find a safe place. And once you do that, we're going to take a look at some of the rules that you need to follow in order to maintain safety in the bed. So let's take a look. First rule is that there's complete silence, nobody talks. Keep your distance. Second rule is that if it gets crowded, as long as you look straight ahead or down or up, and you'll be okay. Some of us may not like crowds, so there's always the option to take a stall. Sometimes we have to show what not to do. So if you do something like that, you get in a lot of trouble. So by understanding the rules of social interaction in bathrooms, us guys can remain safe when we travel. So that's just a quick example of maintaining safety while traveling. Incidental hidden curriculum books, they're not written for people with autism or any other disability, but they do pretty well in explaining the rules of social interaction. I know people on the autism spectrum who will memorize the entire Emily Post book of manners. And they'll quote you what is on what page, what chapter, and when it's appropriate, but the real challenge comes when you need to use it in real time. And that's where the practice is needed. Now I'm thinking about writing another book. Maybe this will be it. The way the prevalence rate has been increasing, and maybe within the next generation, there'll be more of us on the autism spectrum than not. And this book addresses a condition that's characterized by unusual and excessive eye contact. People with this condition have a pathological need for gratuitous social interaction based on meaningless subjects such as the weather. People with this condition assume they understand what other people are thinking. Really, all I'm doing is describing typical behavior the way autism tends to be described. And again, given the rise in prevalence rates, this may be something that we need in the future. So, rolling along, let's take a little peek into what it might be like to have autism. I'm going to borrow from an activity that Bishop Laborde uses in his work to help participants understand what it's like to have a disability. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a short exercise that demonstrates the challenge that many of us with autism face in typical communication and in typical social interaction. So we're going to represent typical social interaction and communication by telling a story in a round-robin fashion. Well, come up with a sentence and then I'll point to people at random, and you just add a sentence that makes sense. So let the fun begin. I rode my bicycle to school today.
Because I didn't feel like walking.
Okay.
And I fell off. And the contents of my bag spilled.
Then I got back up on the bike and gathered everything.
Right.
Then I got to school and realized I lost my keys when everything fell out.
All right, so I got this exciting story about wiping out losing keys. So that happened to my wife once. She wasn't riding a bike, but it was winter and she fell on some ice. Somehow she lost her keys, and we never found those keys again. They just disappeared somewhere. And they weren't there when the snow and ice melted. But anyways, what we represented was typical social interaction, typical communication. Was that easy or was that hard?
Easy.
Yeah, it's not too hard. It's no big deal. So what if we change the rules and engagement a little bit? We do the same thing again. But no words contain the letter N. Not at the middle, not at the beginning, not at the end. We'll try it again. I rode my bicycle to school today. Don't ride my bike this time.
Why?
I don't think we can get more than one word.
Okay, why did
That's more.
you forget the word?
Well, yeah.
Oh, is he asking?
Yes, the story, yeah. I rode my bicycle to school today.
My mom said I could.
All right, all right. Are you going to take a pass? So we're moving on to you. Because you were tired? Uh-oh. I think we did enough. Is this easy or is it hard?
Hard.
Yeah, you have to go through a lot of cognitive effort thinking of keeping track of the rules. Just like people with autism have to keep track of the rules for social interaction and communication. How easy is it to make mistakes? Very. So what happens when somebody makes a mistake? When this poor lady made a mistake? How many of you jumped all over her? And how many of you have seen students with autism jump over anybody who makes a mistake? So why does that happen? And Richard LaVoy has an interesting theory. Well, one is we know with autism we tend to be rule-based. We break the rules, we really notice it. But there's also something else. And that is people with autism, students with autism, seem to spend more time doing things that they're bad at school than just about anybody else. With all of the pull-outs, with all of the remediation, and it's not to say that this may be necessary, they may be necessary. However, so often we're kind of giving the impression to the person with autism, you know, you got a lot wrong with you, there's a lot of things you have to fix. And only when you fix these things will you be good enough to return to class. So what does that do to self-esteem? That goes that way. How do you artificially raise self-esteem? You become a perfectionist and call out everybody else's mistakes. But what you need to do is to prove that you're not the only one who makes mistakes. So how do we help with that? Well, one way might be to find ways for students with autism to be successful. How can we promote success? How can we use their strengths? What about that student who has a particular strength in earthquakes or the weather? Is there a way that we can have that person perhaps give a class report? Or if they live in California, guess who's going to be the expert on earthquakes in earthquakes? What about the person on the spectrum who has such difficulty with the physical act of writing that they're failing all their writing assignments? Is there another way that we can provide for them so that they can get their words out, they can get out their thoughts? And there are a number of times when I've seen a student who was failing a class because they had such a hard time doing this, and when we changed it to this, which is much more structured, we need structure to be successful, now they're one of the best students in the class. So finding ways for students to be successful in the classroom, and by extension in the community, in their work, we can promote fulfillment, productivity, and success for everybody with autism. I want to thank you for your participation today, and for all the work that you're doing, for on behalf of people in the autism spectrum. If you want to email me with questions that you might not have gotten to, or anything else, here's my website. And here it is again. These are some of the books I wrote. Some of them are in different languages. It's coming again. Here it is. It's the same thing here. Here's my website. Contact me through my website.